Welcome to CapitolView, the weekly program where we talk about state politics and government and how it might just affect you. Joining me this week on CapitolView is Dave Dahl, longtime State House reporter for WTAX Radio. Welcome, Dave.
You're looking good, Bruce. Everything almost matches today.
Well, thank you, sir, and you as well. Also, Raymon Troncoso, State House reporter for Capital News, Illinois. Welcome, Raymond.
Thanks for having me.
It is a busy week, and so let's get right into it. The lame duck session concluded last week. Complaints from some sides that this was rushed. Why did we have to do all of these things so quickly? And progress declared by the other side about why did things take so long as they have in the state of Illinois? And one of the important parts of this, perhaps maybe the linchpin of this through this whole lame duck session, was the criminal justice reform bill, which was passed, I believe it was the last piece of legislation that made it out of the General Assembly, if not the last, one of the very last. And there were complaints afterward by some folks, why did we take it this long? The final version of the bill came out, I believe, at 3 a.m, something like that. Passed out of the Senate at 2 hours later, and by noon it was on the governor's desk. Raymond, you have covered this not just during the lame duck session, but in the weeks and months leading up to this. There were a number of hearings that were held remotely about what was contained in this package of legislation. First off, can you tell us what's in there in your view, the important parts, and B, do folks have a legitimate gripe when they say, you know what, this was passed in the dead of night, nobody had warning? Go ahead.
Well, the legislation itself is over 700 pages long. It's a very, very massive bill. It has several different provisions in it. One of the ones that law enforcement has taken issue with is the changes to use of force guidelines, but there's a lot of other things in there that have massive implications for the state. The elimination of cash bail for pretrial detention, that's going to be in effect by 2023. A new police certification by the Illinois Standards and Training Board that every single law enforcement agency in Illinois has to abide by in order to hire police officers and receive state funding. There's a lot in here. In terms of whether or not it's fair that this was introduced so late, the final version was introduced around 3 a.m. and it passed the Senate just before 5 a.m. So it was a middle of the night passage on the very last day of the lame duck. But in terms of everything that was actually in the bill, each of these individual provisions had their own 3-hour hearing several months in advance. Starting in September, actually, with the use of force provisions were discussed in the Illinois Senate. So I don't think it was unexpected what was going to be in this bill, but for the size that the bill was, I think some Republicans and some people out there who oppose what was in it wish there was more debate than just, the few hours it got in the lame duck.
Yeah, and they wish that it would happen while people were awake.
But on the other hand, I mean, I think, it's hard, folks might be hard pressed to think perhaps of a bigger piece of omnibus legislation to be swallowed at once since pension reform. How many years ago was that, Dave, when it was introduced?
Was that 11?
11
earlier, maybe earlier than that.
Yeah, and to get something big done, you can't slow walk it. You got to do it at once. And I think that there were provisions in this, qualified immunity being one. We're going to put that off till later. We're not going to be, that was carved out. Another provision, I think, was cash bail. That's not going to be taking effect immediately, if I understand this correctly, not till 2023. And that is later, that was later than had been originally talked about. There's a cash bail. The end of that has gotten a lot of publicity and attention, and rightfully so. But I wonder about also the certification changes contained here, because we will now have a state board that could have de facto power in whether somebody can be a law enforcement officer in the state of Illinois. And that previously had been largely left up to local jurisdictions. How big is that, Raymond?
It's pretty huge. And this was actually originally a separate bill that was kind of crafted by Attorney General Kwame Raoul's team. And it was a police certification act. It kind of got rolled into the criminal justice omnibus as the clock kept ticking, and it seemed like we weren't going to be able to get to as many bills. So that was kind of added into this. kind of at the last moment. But that has, well, while it doesn't have support of the Sheriff's Association, the Illinois Association of Chiefs of Police have actually been asking for this uniform standards for police certification. Now, while some law enforcement agencies might not like that now there's this state board that determines who gets to be a police officer or not, it does kind of take away some headaches in terms of someone might get fired in this jurisdiction or let go in this jurisdiction for some sort of misconduct. And when they go to apply at a new police department, they have no way of knowing that that happened. Yeah. So this kind of sets uniform standards so everyone's on the up and up about, who's been following the rules, so to say, of what it means to be a law enforcement officer in Illinois and who hasn't.
Well, and that speaks to the stereotype, Raymond. Yeah, it speaks to the stereotype of police covering up for their own, police covering up for other police. Stereotypically, customarily, the police unions don't like any of this stuff, any of it.
Yeah. Raymond, could this not, and correct me if I'm wrong, because could this also lead to decertification of existing police officers, i.e. The police agency in whatever local jurisdiction doesn't take strong enough action in the eyes of the person who complained? They could then could they not, to the state board? And could the state board then revoke certification? And it's not even a question of transferring from one agency to the other, but staying where you're at. Is that possible?
It is possible. So basically, every 3 years, an officer has to go kind of submit their certification license to the board, and all the conduct they've done over the past 3 years, including mandatory trainings that they have to have gone to, making sure every complaint against them will be evaluated. That's all part of this. So yeah, someone who's currently an officer and is in good standing, could be decertified as a result of this bill. But the provisions in place, it goes through several levels, including the department itself, before it even gets to ILETSB. And even at that level, there's two different boards, one that makes the actual decision whether to decertify, and a board before that has to recommend decertification. So there's been a lot of worries that, people are going to submit anonymous complaints and get officers fired. But there's just so many filters that a complaint has to go through before that I can't really see that as being a very, very reasonable claim.
Yeah, I guess one reason I asked that question is that I'm aware of at least a couple issues, cases here where we're broadcasting from central Illinois, where police agencies, the chiefs and sheriffs have attempted to fire officers, and that's been overturned by arbitrators. They were part of the arbitration process that's spelled out in collective bargaining agreements. And I've heard sheriffs and police chiefs say, my hands are tied by this. I wanted to get rid of this person because they had engaged in conduct which I found sufficient to merit their dismissal, but I could not do that. Does this help with a situation like that?
Yeah, and that's pretty much what the Association of Chiefs of Police asked for, is basically, we need some uniform standards that aren't up to, what a union may feel about a situation. Now we have uniform standards everywhere. And, that was actually a provision in the original bill that was cut, was collective bargaining. Right. It was going to remove the ability of police unions to collectively bargain on issues of discipline. They would only be able to do wages and benefits. The opposition to that was so enormous that it was ultimately stripped from the final bill. But we still have these uniform standards that are basically going to overcome any sort of issues people may have with an officer being let go.
Does that amount to compromise in any way, shape, or form? I.e., you're right, the collective bargaining aspects were stripped out, but yet when we put in Kwame Raoul's the bill that Kwame Raoul's office had been taking the lead on, it sounds to me like it's perhaps a backstop. Is that a reasonable way of thinking about it or not?
Probably. I think, it's not quite as extreme as removing the ability of unions to have a say and protect their members, but it does give the management an avenue, not just to evaluate every officer that comes through their door looking for a job, but to let go of officers that they may no longer want in their agency for reasons of misconduct.
Let's move on to cash bail, because that has gotten the most attention, I think, rightfully so. This again, it was supposed to, now it's not going to happen immediately. What happens between now and 2023 to ensure that folks get a fair shake, regardless of how much money they have in terms of getting released from jail? but also protect the public? How do they balance that, and how do we get from where we're at now to that point in 2 years hence now? What happens in these intervening years?
Well, now it's kind of in the hands of the courts, of the administrative systems that the Illinois Supreme Court uses. A lot of this specific legislation on cash bail also used to be its own bill that was submitted by Senator Robert Peters of Chicago, which then got rolled into this massive omnibus that just took up so many legislation. Originally, it was actually based on a report the Illinois Supreme Court released in April of last year that basically outlined, we think we need about 2 years to move away from cash bail to this pretrial detention system. Now that's in law, and while originally it was effective immediately, the courts, reached out to the sponsors of this bill and said, hey, push this back 2 years, like we said in our report, and we'll have something for you by 2023. So the actual language in the bill is that by 2023, we need a pretrial detention system that is non-monetary and evaluates people based on, the risk of them not showing up for their trial date, the danger they may pose to the community, and, the details of the crime itself. So what that system specifically will look like is kind of up to the courts at this point to determine that by 2023.
There had been opposition to this by state's attorneys outside Chicago. Kim Fox, the Cook County State's attorney, has endorsed this. State's attorneys elsewhere in Illinois had said no. There had been stories, and some police organizations as well. If this comes to pass, then arsonists and violent, dangerous people will be released from jail, who otherwise would have been kept, and they were going to commit more mayhem. What's your sense? Is this hype? Or do they have a point here?
I think it was a tad bit hyperbolic in terms of the situation. They said that people would be released, but the truth is, we won't actually know what the system looks like until the courts present it. We do know that, cash bail is a thing of the past. It's on the books now. So by 2023, whether that system's ready or not, we're not going to be holding people unless they can pay.
Okay. Let's move on from criminal justice. Again, a huge topic, and there's going to be more that's going to happen, I think, in terms of qualified immunity. One thing that may have been kicked down the road or will be dealt with later. Chris Welch, new Speaker of the Illinois House of Representatives, has engaged in his past in conduct that is perhaps not the best conduct for someone to have engaged in, regardless of your status in life, which is to say he was credibly accused of beating a woman in 2002 and was then, 10 years later, engaged in a tight contest to join the Illinois House of Representatives and won by 36 votes. And
he also was accused of sexual harassment against employees of the school district where he was the school board president, and he apparently was dating one of the employees of the school district and broke up with her, and that led to some legal problems as well.
I was getting to that, but let's do an omnibus here and say he has had some issues with women.
With me too.
In his past. And he has now been elected. There was a huddle, which is very well captured by a photograph by Justin Fowler in the State Journal Register, where it's tight who's going to become the next speaker. And Mr. Welch, Representative Welch, was talking to Democratic women at the Bank of Springfield Center. He was subsequently passed through and elected Speaker of the House. Since then, he has said some things that are not perhaps in line with the truth. In terms of what happened in his past. He has said, I was never arrested. That's simply not true, according to the Illinois State Attorney General's office in a report issued in 2012. That's just not true. It's also in opposition to what the police report said at the time, in which he was taken into custody. He was told to turn around, put your hands behind your back. You're getting a free ride in a squad car. Does what he says now about that stuff, does it matter? Does it matter that he is saying things now about events in his past that do not comport with the record? What do we think?
Probably doesn't matter to the 70-some who voted for him for speaker. And that's the constituency you need to convince. This stuff was way in the past. And, who among us, Bruce? Who among us? He could have said that stuff was in my past. While I was never charged, while I was never found liable in the civil suits, I'm embarrassed by that behavior. I'm a better person now, and I'm dedicating my life to being a better man. I'm dedicating my time in the General Assembly to being the best speaker I can be. And he didn't exactly say those things. He kind of went into the rabbit hole of some of the people interviewing him, saying, well, did you do this or did you do that? And he answers, well, I was never arrested.
But we know that he wasn't.
It doesn't help. It's not helping.
No, it's not helping. Yeah. And I guess what I think about, I agree. Why are you saying you weren't arrested when you were arrested? And why, when people ask you about it, are you then saying, in respect for the rights of the person involved, I'm not going to talk about this? Raymond, does this pass the sniff test? Or is this just a sideshow? Because what everybody has been talking about, he's the first Black Speaker of the Illinois House of Representatives. He's also the first person other than Mike Madigan to be the Speaker of the House of Representatives, going back for how long? Raymond, what do you think? Is this a significant issue? Should it be a real issue? And can Republicans make hay of it?
Well, I'm not really sure of the political implications down the line for Chris Welch. We'll see if there are any ultimately. But, what was most important is the night of. This was an issue for the Women's Caucus. And as you said, that famous picture of them crowding around him. And ultimately, they decided to support him. So we don't know what was said in private. We don't know what negotiations took place. But ultimately, people who were in that caucus had to decide that this wasn't a major issue. We'll see what they say down the line, but I'm not really sure what fallout's going to result from this, if any.
Bruce, now of all times, we had the Speaker's chief of staff, out on his ear, and some other people in the Madigan political circle and government circle out because they weren't right on Me Too, because they said the wrong thing, because they were bullying. And you would think that based on that, now would be the time to get a woman speaker, maybe even a minority woman speaker, and they didn't do that. And you look at the allegations against Speaker Welch, and I think you've got an edge of, this is the best we can do. And I asked John Gordon Booth that very question, and she said yes, that Welch would be an excellent speaker. And John Gordon Booth is a Black woman from Peoria who's been on the leadership team. In fact, she's just been appointed to the Welch leadership team. You would think she'd be a very good speaker. She's she's a striking woman, an imposing woman, but also very smart. And she said, you got to have votes. And I've got a lot on my plate. I've got a little girl. I'm busy with this and that and that. And 3 women did run for speaker, and none of them had enough votes, nowhere near. So,
I guess I wonder if, and it's hard to keep track of time, but would this have flown when Harvey Weinstein and Me Too was really in the headlines? Would this have passed? Would this have ever happened? And it's hard for me to imagine that it would have.
It's among the 70 of them, and whatever deal was cut.
And you're right. It's amongst the 70 of them.
And that's not to diminish Speaker Welch's skills as a speaker or anything going on with him in 2021. But you dig up stuff like this, and as you said, well, on the one hand, the Republicans will make hay out of it. On the other hand, when you look at their numbers in the legislature, the Republicans haven't been able to make hay out of anything. They couldn't make hay out of hay in the elections.
Fair enough. Let's move on. COVID. We're doing better. The numbers are down. Raymond, again, you're more on top of this than a lot of us. But we've gone down now. It's safe to exercise and breathe on folks again in gyms. Are you going to be out in the Y anytime soon, or is it time to maybe wait and see?
Well, personally, I think it's time to wait and see and see things calm down. But if we're looking at the metrics, everything's really pointing in a very positive way. Our case positivity is way down. It's been going down for over a month. Deaths are still kind of high, but deaths always lag kind of 2 weeks behind hospitalizations and positive case results. But, we're opening up. Pritzker has let us move out of the tiered mitigations for some regions. And I think now all regions, except for one of the 11 that exist in Illinois, are out of those tier 3 mitigations. Some have moved to no tier mitigations, which is phase 4 of the plan that allows for indoor dining. We have, I believe, 3 regions, including the one we're in right now that has Springfield, that lets you do indoor dining up to 50% capacity. And just, over a week ago, that wasn't allowed. So I think in terms of COVID, everything's trending in the right direction. Vaccinations, now that Biden's in order, it's suspected that he's going to evoke some executive powers that allow him to expedite not just vaccine production, but vaccine deliveries to every state. So we're looking at a very different reality in this first half of 2021 than we saw even the last few months.
Good. And does then the governor come out as, hey, I got this under control a lot better than a lot of other states did. Look at my numbers. I'm able to open up. Does this give him, because he had a rough session. I mean, it's been the last, the lame duck session. He didn't get a lot of stuff done that he wanted. He didn't get his progressive tax passed. He's not done well. Does this sort of thing put some wind in his sails and give him some fresh life?
In terms of how COVID's trending, probably. In terms of the economic fallout of COVID, which is still so severe, not just on state revenues, but for people personally, their own economic status that affects how they see, everyone in power in Illinois, right? How am I doing right now compared to how I was doing before these people were elected? That kind of depends on what Biden does. Pritzker's been seeking some federal stimulus. He's been asking for it for months. And he's been kind of saying that, if we get Biden in office, we're going to see some federal stimulus that's going to help with our own revenues. And we'll see if that comes to pass. That might be the wind in his sail that you're talking about. It might not be. He really is, trying to anticipate what's coming down the pipeline as much as anyone else at this point.
Yeah. And the decoupling issue wherein the business community is saying don't do it because this means we're going to have to pay some taxes. From the state's perspective, we need the money. Whereas Speaker Welch has indicated, yeah, I'm pretty open to this. Is this as much as a done deal, something that's going to get passed, as Welch had perhaps hinted at, like we did with the minimum wage? What do you think?
Well, it's probably going to come down to how well Welch can negotiate, because this decoupling bill did come up during the lame duck session, and it did not have the votes. It couldn't be passed. So once this new session comes in during the regular session, we'll see if some hearts and minds can be changed, because that's the only way it's going to get through, is if you get some people who said they weren't voting for it to vote for it.
Yeah, I want to move on again. We're going to get close on time here soon, I'm very sure, but we have an opening in the Senate to replace former Senator Andy Manar. And this looks to be perhaps a placeholder sort of arrangement. The smart money says Avery Bourne's going to be collecting that seat after remapping. And so whichever Democrat fills it isn't going to be for long. We've heard Doris Turner, who is the alderwoman here in the city of Springfield.
He's in charge of the committee too.
He was in charge of the committee of the and the person, and Dave, you might know the name, it's escaping me at the moment, but the chair of the Macoupin County, that person, Sue Scher, has said not for me, no thanks, and understandably so. Her seat is relatively safe. Why would she take a placeholder? Do we know who this is going to be, and does this have any real substantive effect on the course of legislation?
Well, I would say no. That's a big hole with Senator Manar leaving. We've got another question of Senator Brady, and now in the past few days, Senator Staines has announced departure. But it's almost an anomaly that a Democrat got elected to that seat and was able to make as much headway as he did, talking about Manar. So, yeah, I think you're onto something, Bruce.
Fair enough. And and Manar went from what was he, 80,000 or so? That's his salary to 238.
278.
278. Okay. Well, good luck to him, and we can't blame him for not going to say he took the money and run, because he deserves every nickel he gets. I think he's done a fabulous job, and that's my own personal opinion. And those,
And he's got three kids, three
he's got
teenagers.
3 kids. And with that said, it's time to leave everybody. And so thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week on Capitol View.